Hey folks, just going through the diary exercise that we went through the other day. So looking at trying to make something that will log in a file. And so just to give you some context here, I'm using Python and I'm just in this regular folder for iCloud. So this is where any new files that I create will show up. And the same thing should happen with you in PyCharm. So if you create and open a file, it should show up in the same directory that you're working. So my diary will show up in this area. And so the first thing that I'd like to do whenever I'm making a program is start to get all the things that I want imported. So I know that I want to pull in some type of date time thing. In a diary, I'd like to say what we do each day or during the time of day. So here for import date time, this will allow for timestamps on our diary, right? So we can actually add things onto our diary as we input them. Next, I'm going to actually define a function called diary and a couple of file things that we should start with. Now, I will add some extra functionality to this program as we go, but just to begin with, I'll show you how we open a file. So immediately here, when I file, I'll set something equal to this file object. Now, it could be called anything. Sometimes you see it called F. It might be called file in this case, but we're going to reference that later when we close and write to the file, and you'll see that in a second. So here I'm just going to call this file that I'm opening diary.text, right? So we always have to put the ending on these. So if it's a text file, put text. And there's many different ways to use this second letter here. Some of those letters you can also see W for write, R for read only, or A, which is equal to append. So append means to add on to, and so every time we use A, we're going to append on to the previously existing document. Okay, so the second thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to write to the file in my function. And so I call on my file that already existed. And so again, if this was written as just G, I would write G.write here. If it's file, I write file.write here. And so file.write, and then I want to put probably just something on the inside of here, right? So we will put file write, and let's call this test, right? And so we file write test, and then we will file.close. And now this, if I were to use this function, right? So later on down in my code, I have to call on the function that I created, right? So I'm calling it here. Let's run this. Hold on a sec here. And so if it ran correctly, we should see that there is a diary object created over here. And because I ran it 3 times, I clicked it 3 times by mistake, it says test. So I'm actually able to write onto this file. And now I'm going to make some customizations in order to make this a little bit more user-friendly. So the first thing I want to do is that when I open my diary program, I want it to know that it's actually working. So it's going to print something. Like some type of thing like, how do you feel today? Right? Usually a diary is about your personal feelings. And so I'd say print, how do you feel today? Second thing I'd like to do is I'd like to get some user input. And so this will allow us to get some text from the user. This str function allows it to make whatever I input a string, so that way I can treat it like it's actually a text value. Now here, inside of this input, I'll probably say some prompt like, please tell me everything, right? Just to let me know that, the computer's empathetic and cares. So now that's going to allow the user to write something inside as X. Next, we're going to open that file that we were looking for. And one thing that we should do is I'd like to actually add the date onto each one of these things. So I'm going to call date is going to be a string, and I'm going to use date time. Now, the way that I'm calling this is a little bit funky, but it's giving me the date and time directly right now. Okay, so that will show up at, for instance, right now it's 12:20 on Friday, January 17th. When I click enter, that will show me the time and date. All right, so I don't want my file just to all jumble together in text bits. I want to actually write new lines every time that I write a bit of code or write a bit of an entry. So here, after this, I'll actually write file dot write, right? So we'll actually writing onto our file right now, and we'll write the date plus a new line. And so a new line, we actually have to go into a string and write \n. And so at the end of that write, it'll make it so that way we have a new line on our file. Second thing I want to write is going to be a dash, a couple of dashes. This is a style thing, and I'll show that in a moment, but this is just so that way we have a new line, and it's going to separate my text from my actual date stamp. And so if I do this, I'll also add a new line at the end, so that way it knows to jump and hit enter, basically. File.write one last time. Let's actually put our x value. Now, if you recall, our x value is equal to this string that we inputted. So this is going to write whatever my journal entry is for the day onto this program. And of course, again, I'm going to add another new line here. If you'll notice, inside of write, you'll never have a comma. So you'll never have two entities or two arguments. You'll only have one. And so I use this plus in order to get more than one thing communicated, but we can only write one thing inside of those brackets. Okay, so I'm going to delete this line here because I no longer want it to write test. I actually want to write something. And so here at the very end, after file close, we need to be able to write another entry perhaps. And so I'd like to put a string in input and find out if the user wants to write something else. Would you like to write another entry? And then we'll give them two options, kind of like yes or maybe no. Right? And so let's say that run is equal to true. And so while, I think we don't need that anymore. Here's the main function that will test to see if we're going to be actually using multiple inputs. So while this next little bit is true, if y is equal to yes, right? So recall, I'm setting up my y here. Y is a user input, and so it'll either be yes or no. If y is equal to yes, so yes, I would like to put another input, I'm actually going to call my diary function that I've already made, right? So it's going to continue to use this whole block of code if I want to write another entry. Else if I have y equals to no, then I will probably say I don't want to do another entry. I'm actually going to print goodbye because that means that the program has ended. Now, in order to end a program inside of a while function or a while loop, I need to write break, and that gets me out of the loop. Finally, in case somebody writes something that I don't know what it is, let's say that it's like yeah, yes with two S's or just cow or something funny. Here we can actually print, I'm sorry, I don't understand. And then after that, we can copy and paste our Y button. And so we can say, let's update this Y function now. All right, so at the end, if it's not yes or not no, and we don't know what it is, it'll say, I'm sorry, I don't understand. And then at the end, it'll update and say, would you like to write another? So it's asking the question again. Let's see how this works. And so it begins by saying, how do you feel today? Tell me everything. It allows the users to write something. So I will write, I feel pretty good, right? And then would you like to write another entry? Just for the sake of testing, I'll say yes. And so that's going back into the diary function completely. How do you feel today? Tell me everything. Say still very good. Thanks. All right. And so let's say no, let's get out of here and it'll goodbye. Now, I think this was a bit of a glitch. I think I may have keyed this wrong, so it doesn't seem to be exiting, and we will fix that perhaps in class. Now, if we go back and look at our diary itself, you'll see here, each time I hit enter after my tests that I had at the beginning, it wrote a timestamp, it wrote what the entry was, and then another timestamp, what the entry was, timestamp, what the entry was. So this is how I wanted to get my diary working today. The while problem here is where this break is happening. I think maybe we should write something else, but I'm gonna have to double check that and update it, maybe on the video as an update, or perhaps I'll do it in class with you guys. Thanks for watching. And let's go back and make sure that it's still working. At the very end on January 17th, it said, thanks for watching. Perfect. Thanks, guys.